Hi, I'm Busy. I like making diagrams, so let's get right into it. So miscommunication is something that takes place through most of life. So what I want to do with this video is talk a little bit about how to communicate better and what usually goes wrong when miscommunication takes place. Now, at the most basic level, communication looks like this: what you say. So this is literally the things you're saying and how you say them. But underneath that is what you mean. And there's a dissonance because sometimes some people don't say what they mean, or they refrain from saying anything at all, thus leading the last step of this process to be confused, where it's what I think you mean. So it's the interpretation by somebody else as to what you're getting at. And because there's so much room for error, you can easily see things breaking down, if not from the speaker's perspective, then from the listener. So if we look at this chart, we can talk about speaker intention versus listener reaction. We'll get into some of those communication skills in a moment. But when the speaker says something positive and the listener takes it as a positive, this is a compliment, generally speaking. Usually because the speaker is clear on what they mean and the information they're giving, this allows the listener to trust what they're saying to be true. Now, something a little interesting, if the speaker says something negative with hopes of it being a positive, this is generally called teasing. However, this is something that's difficult to do with people you don't know very well. Not everyone has the skills to tease a stranger, and on top of that, not every stranger likes to be teased. So this is where we can get into the nuance of the situation. A little lower, we have a mistake. The speaker's intention is to say something positive, and the listener reacts to it negative. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons, and may have to do with an incongruence between the communication skills between both parties, but it's difficult to say as every situation, again, is nuanced. And the last one is a negative seeking a negative. This is an insult. So if the speaker is intending to be harmful and the listener takes it to be harmful, very easily seen as a bad thing. But because it's generally easier to see what compliments are and what insults are, the line between teasing somebody and saying a mistake can look practically invisible. So here we have 4 basic communication skills. Starting at the top with thinking. Thinking, of course, occurring in the brain, is an internal part of communication. With it being internal, it is impossible to only communicate this way. True mind reading is not a thing, and if you expect people to understand you without saying what your thoughts are, you're going to be mistaken. The aim for thinking is to be clear. Thoughts can feel scattered and random, and to some people can feel very overwhelming. So because that's the case, we want our thinking for communication to be clear. If we begin to overthink why someone is acting the way they are, or overthinking about how we are acting, we can get ourselves stuck in a thought loop. And while yes, it is important to think at higher levels, it is also important to relax the mind. And while yes, you could assume all these different things in your head, sometimes it's better to go with a simpler approach. Because again, if you're just going to spend your time thinking about communicating with somebody, you're not actually communicating with them. And the last component is type 1 versus type 2 thinking. So there's a split between the 2 types of thinking. Type 1 thinking is quick, intuitive, and is useful for situations where you need an immediate response. Now that thinking is not necessarily bad. However, it's not always effective in being a better communicator. And that's what type 2 is for. Type 2 is methodical, slower, deliberate thinking, taking your time and really assessing how you feel about something. You may speak without thinking, and then think later, did I really mean that? Or did I just say that because of the people I was around? Or because I was under the influence? So getting comfortable using both types will make you a better communicator. Next we have nonverbal. Nonverbal communication takes place in the body, and because of that, everything your body does can be taken as nonverbal communication. From your fidgeting, to your slouched posture, or the fullness of your smile. Nonverbal communication is external, so because it can be seen, this is a type of communication that can be interpreted by others. However, as we talked about before, because there's ambiguity in nonverbal communication, you may be sending out signals that you actually don't want to send out. For example, if you communicate with everyone the same way, and you're wanting somebody to know that you're attracted to them, but you don't communicate with them differently, they may have a hard time interpreting your feelings as romantic. Or alternatively, if you do make the effort to show them you're attracted to them with your nonverbal communication, but it's too subtle, it may not do what you want it to do. Because similarly to the thinking, you're still trying to get them to read between the lines. But the size of the lines you chose barely have a gap between them. So our aim for nonverbal communication is to be intentional. If you want someone to know you're into them, you have to make it obvious. Or if you want to convey what you're communicating, it has to be clear that it's matching. For the last part of nonverbal communication, we get into the idea of nature versus nurture, which I have discussed on this channel before. But there may be things that your body feels more natural that may actually go against what you want to display. Like we mentioned before about posture, maybe it feels more comfortable to slouch. But because you're slouching, it looks like you're tired all the time, or it looks like you're disengaged. So in some cases, we have to go against what feels natural and learn new body language. Because something unique to nonverbal communication, and that is shared with thinking, is the fact that you're always doing this, even if you're not aware of it. So when you're just walking at the park, getting groceries, at the gym, you are displaying something with your body. You are communicating something to the people around you. And if you don't have awareness of what that is, again, you may be giving out a message that you actually don't want to give out. Next is listening. Listening, of course, takes place in the ears and is internal. So like thinking, no one can really know if you're truly listening. It can be assumed you're listening to who's speaking, but you may also just be listening to your own thoughts, or some show that's playing in the background, or just anything aside from the conversation happening in front of you. For effective communication, your aim is to be engaged. Now this is tricky because not every conversation you're going to have is going to be engaging. You may get tired of small talk. You may get tired of the talking phase, or don't want to listen to icebreakers for people you're probably never going to talk to again. So the idea is knowing when to engage. When you're listening to someone or something that you're interested in, that will naturally engage you more. However, I do think there is merit to listening to things or pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and trying to listen to things that don't initially engage you. I find a good benchmark for myself when I'm listening is if I can repeat back what was said, not in the exact same phrasing, but rephrased in my own words, showing that I interpreted correctly what was said. Something that listening shares with nonverbal is that the listening that takes place for you doesn't really turn off, whether it's the actual sounds around you or the stream of consciousness. There's that level of engagement that fluctuates, and like nonverbal communication, can be hard to tell if someone's really listening to you, unless you know what to look for. So this brings us to passive versus active listening. Kind of like everything before, there is a place for both of these. Passive listening gets a pretty bad rap for people who tend to be less engaged with certain things, but I feel passive listening is a type of listening you do for meditation, the type for relaxation, where you're not looking for sounds to listen to, you're just letting them come to you, whether that's the sound of nature outside or the slow murmuring of a sleeping household. And active is more like what we were talking about before. It's the willingness to engage with the conversation, to pay attention to the small details, and try to take it all in. And knowing when to use either of these will make you a better communicator. And lastly, we have speaking. Speaking takes place in the vocal tract, which is the combination of a couple different organs, most notably the mouth, the vocal folds, and the rest of the respiratory system. Speaking, pretty obviously, is external. However, just because you can hear what someone is saying, as we discussed earlier, does not always mean you know what they mean. If what someone is saying can be in a gray area, this may lead you to misinterpret what they're trying to get at. So for better speaking, your aim is to be concise. People think confidence in social situations comes from saying a lot, but it's not. It's saying what you need to say. It's being honest and direct. Because if you're as direct as possible and someone misinterprets it, there's nothing you can really do about that, because the truth with communication is the only part of it you control is your own. So the last aspect of speaking I want to get into is intimacy versus information. So we use communication for various reasons, and I think these two aspects sum up a majority of them. So intimacy is any emotional bonding, any social situations. So if you're trying to get to know somebody, you're going to speak to them. However, this can run in contrast with informational communication. Sometimes when you're speaking, you may want to lay out things matter of fact, very brief. And some people like that, and others don't. So when I mentioned concise earlier, the idea is not using as little words as possible, but it's using the necessary amount of words to convey what you want to say. So it rides the line between intimacy and information. When you're communicating with someone, maybe you do want to get closer to them. You should still try to convey something. Just like all the other skills, there is nuance here. I think overall, it's good to balance both forms. But sometimes trying to convey information isn't necessary. If someone's confiding in you, all you need to do is just be there. You don't have to tell them how to fix their problems, nor do you have to convey everything perfectly. You just have to be empathetic. And similarly, if you do want someone to give you advice, you should try to get directly to the point of what you're asking for. Because the more well-informed the person is, the better they can help you, if that's what you want from them. So in short, communication is complicated. And naturally, this video can't talk about every facet of communication. So ideally, if you've tried your best to cultivate those skills, and if you try to give your speaking partner the benefit of the doubt, sometimes it can look as easy as what you say and what I say. So what do you think about the communication skills I listed? And what do you think about the topic of this video? What are some of the issues you see with communication? And do you have any solutions for them? I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And as always, thank you for watching.